One day after locking down for a shooting on campus, Texas A&M University at Commerce identified the two women who died as sisters, 19-year-old Deja Matts and 20-year-old Abbaney Matts.
And they took both of my daughters. I think it was like a coward move. I mean, somebody would do something like that, you know what I'm saying? My daughters were fun, uplifting, had plenty of friends, nice folks, you know what I'm saying? They took both of my daughters.
I lay awake every night and I wonder what happened. I wonder how someone was able to get in a secure building, up secure elevators, shoot and kill both of my kids and shoot my grandson.
A baby. Who shoots a baby? Who do that? Let alone two girls? You're a coward. Coward.
At exactly 1 a.m. on Monday, February 3rd, 2020, security cameras inside the Pride Rock Residence Hall at Texas A&M Commerce captured a man stepping out of the elevator. He didn't have a student ID, he didn't have a key card, but he knew exactly which door he was looking for. For the next 7 hours and 44 minutes, that man remained inside room 231. Neighboring students slept soundly down the hall, completely unaware of the psychological hostage situation unfolding just inches away. At 8:44 a.m., the man calmly walked back to the elevator, stepped into a black sedan, and drove away. When campus police finally pushed the door open 2 hours later, they found a scene of absolute devastation. Two young sisters were gone, but hidden in the shadows of that room was a final, chilling puzzle piece, a detail that proved this wasn't just a targeted hit. It was the deadly climax of a systemic failure that allowed an undetected killer to walk right through a university's front doors. This is the harrowing story of how the system completely failed 19-year-old Deja Matts. And trust me, the betrayal starts long before he ever set foot on that campus. We are diving deep into the terrifying timeline of this case, mapping out the exact red flags that were completely ignored by law enforcement. If you want to uncover the dark truth behind true crime investigations like this one, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on all notifications. You won't want to miss a single second of how this mystery untangles. Before we rewind the clock to the night this nightmare actually began, I want to know who is in the room with us today. Drop a comment down below and let me know. Where in the world are you watching this from? Let's get into it.
Big story now in Texas, where there's been a shooting on a college campus. Two people are dead, another injured after a shooting at Texas A&M's Commerce campus about an hour outside of Dallas. Police are taping off a freshman residence hall where it happened. Classes have also been canceled for the day. The injured person was rushed to the hospital. Right now, police are not saying exactly what happened or who the shooter is.
To understand the absolute gravity of what happened inside room 231, we have to look past the yellow crime scene tape and the flashing emergency lights. We have to look at who these young women actually were. Because before Monday, February 3rd, became a date etched into a police ledger, it was supposed to be just another ordinary college morning for 19-year-old Deja Matts. Deja was a freshman at Texas A&M Commerce. But she wasn't just passing through. She was a young woman on a definitive mission, pursuing a Bachelor of Science in Public Health. Those who knew her described Deja as a beacon of ambition, someone who looked at the world's vulnerabilities and wanted to heal them. Her college dorm room at the Pride Rock Residence Hall wasn't just a place to sleep between lectures. For Deja, it was the very first milestone of her independence. It was a sanctuary she had earned, a place where her future was actively being built, one semester at a time. And that weekend, Deja wanted to share that sanctuary with the people she loved most. 65 miles away in the city of Garland, Texas, lived Deja's older sister, 20-year-old Abbaney Matts. Abbaney's world revolved entirely around her 2-year-old son, a bright, energetic toddler who filled her life with purpose. Being a young mother is never easy, but Abbaney was resilient. Yet, as January rolled into February, the weight of her everyday life in Garland was growing increasingly heavy. She needed a break. She needed to breathe. So Abbaney packed a weekend bag, buckled her little boy into his car seat, and made the hour-long drive northeast down the highway toward Commerce. The plan was simple, beautiful, and deeply ordinary. A fun, relaxed family weekend with her little sister. They would order food, stay up late talking in the dorm, and let the toddler play on the campus grounds. For Abbaney, driving onto that university campus felt like stepping into an entirely different world. A world governed by safety, academic promise, and peace. But as the weekend drew to a close and Sunday night bled into the early hours of Monday morning, An invisible shroud was already tightening around room 231. When the smoke cleared on Monday morning and the initial shock settled into a grim, methodical homicide investigation, detectives from the campus police and the Texas Rangers were left staring at a massive, baffling question mark.
University Police Department, this is Kim.
Police did release a 911 call that was made by a student at the college saying there was a bullet hole in her dorm room.
And there's a hole through my wall, and on the other side directly across, there's a nick in my calendar. So it looks like something was shot through the wall and hit my calendar.
On paper, Deja Matts had no enemies. She was a stellar student, deeply embedded in her studies, with a completely spotless background. There were no disgruntled ex-partners, no dangerous associations, and absolutely no reason why anyone would travel to a university campus to execute a 19-year-old public health major in her sleep. The math simply wasn't adding up. Why Deja? Why Pride Rock? But as the forensics team meticulously processed the dorm room, analyzing the trajectory of the bullets and the positioning of the bodies, the narrative began to shift. A subtle, terrifying realization started to dawn on the investigators. Deja hadn't invited a monster into her sanctuary. She had provided a haven for her sister, completely unaware that a lethal shadow had trailed Abbaney all the way from the streets of Garland. The primary target of the rage that erupted inside room 231 wasn't the college freshman. The danger had walked through those secure campus doors, specifically hunting Abbaney. As detectives dug into Abbaney's life back home, the puzzle pieces began to rearrange themselves into a picture of pure horror. This wasn't a random act of campus violence. It was a highly targeted, deeply personal execution. But as the police frantically pulled Abbaney's call logs and background history, they realized something even more disturbing. The entity hunting Abbaney wasn't a stranger hiding in the bushes. It was someone the authorities already knew, someone who should have been behind a steel door miles away from any university campus. And as the investigators stared at the suspect's name on their computer screens, a chilling realization set in. The system had already had this man in their grasp just days prior. Which leaves us with a haunting, unanswered question as we move forward. If the police had already locked this threat away, how did he manage to stand outside room 231 with a loaded gun? To look at 21-year-old Jacques Dshawn Smith was to look at a man who had mastered the art of hiding a storm behind an unbothered face. Outwardly, he was just another young adult navigating the sprawling suburbs of the Dallas-Fort Worth metroplex. He wasn't a student at Texas A&M Commerce. He had no ties to higher education, no interest in public health, and no reason to ever step foot on a college campus. But he possessed a toxic, suffocating sense of ownership over 20-year-old Abbaney Matts. In Jacques' mind, Abbaney wasn't an independent woman or a mother building a life. She was a possession. And when a possession tries to break free, a monster usually tears through the fabric of the ordinary. To understand how that monster ended up in a secure university residential hall, we have to rewind the clock exactly 1 week before the tragedy. We have to look at Monday, January 27, 2020. The time is 2 p.m. It was a crisp afternoon in Garland, Texas, when Abbaney Matts finally found the courage to say the words so many victims of abuse dread to speak. She looked at Jacques and told him they needed a break. She wanted to end the relationship. She wanted her life back. But Jacques didn't see a breakup. He saw a rebellion. In an instant, the domestic space transformed into a war zone of pure, unbridled rage. Jacques didn't just argue. He unleashed a calculated assault designed to break her body and her spirit. He grabbed her keys to strip away her ability to flee. He cornered her. In a flash of violence, a heavy glass lamp was shattered directly over Abbaney's head. As she reeled from the impact, dizzy and bleeding, Jacques picked up whatever household items he could find, weaponizing her own home against her. A box fan was hurled across the room, a television set was ripped from its fixtures and thrown at her. And then the brutality escalated to a sickening level. Jacques seized a heavy metal frying pan from the kitchen. With absolute malice, he struck Abbaney repeatedly over the head and body, the blunt force fracturing any lingering sense of safety she had ever felt. Finally, as Abbaney lay battered on the floor, Jacques pinned her down, pulled a sharp kitchen knife, and pressed the cold steel directly against her throat. He looked into her eyes and delivered an explicit, chilling promise. He was going to kill her. Somehow, the authorities were alerted. Garland police officers rushed to the scene, breaching the residence and pulling Jacques away from Abbaney before he could fulfill his vow. He was handcuffed, loaded into the back of a squad car, and booked into the Dallas County Jail. He was charged with aggravated assault with a deadly weapon. The system had him. The red flags weren't just waving, they were drenched in blood. This is the moment where the story shifts from a narrative of domestic terror to a devastating chronicle of systemic failure. This is where the protective barriers of society completely cracked. On Wednesday, January 29th, just 48 hours after Jacques Smith had held a knife to a mother's throat and promised to end her life, a bureaucratic wheel turned in the Dallas County judicial system. Despite the unimaginable violence of the assault, despite the explicit death threats, and despite the fact that Jacques was a dangerous, highly volatile individual, his bond was set at a shockingly low $15,000. For a man determined to maintain control, that wasn't a legal deterrent. It was a price admission. Jacques posted the bond. The heavy steel doors of the Dallas County Jail slid open, and he walked out into the afternoon sun. A free man. When the news reached Abbaney, absolute terror set in. She knew that a piece of paper like a restraining order wouldn't stop the man who had beaten her with a frying pan. Garland was no longer safe. Nowhere in Dallas County was safe. In a desperate bid to survive, she packed her bags, grabbed her 2-year-old son, and fled 65 miles away to the absolute safest place she could think of. Her sister Deja's secured, keycard-locked dorm room at Pride Rock. She believed that the university's strict security protocols would act as an impenetrable shield between her family and the monster hunting them. 2 days later, on Friday, January 31st, a terrifying realization finally rippled through the state's legal apparatus. Administrative oversight had caused a massive, lethal delay. Officials finally realized that when Jacques was arrested for the brutal assault on Abbaney, he was already actively violating his probation for a prior violent crime. He never should have been granted a bond. He never should have been allowed to walk out of that jail. Panicked, the state moved to correct its fatal error. A judge officially revoked Jacques' probation and issued an emergency arrest warrant, ordering law enforcement to track him down and bring him back into custody immediately. But the paperwork moved at the speed of bureaucracy, while Jacques was moving at the speed of obsession. By the time the warrant was signed and distributed, Jacques was already gone. He had already slipped into the shadows, tracking Abbaney's digital footprint, trailing her straight toward the small town of Commerce. The system had realized its mistake, but they were chasing a ghost. And as the weekend sun began to set over the Texas A&M Commerce campus, a final horrifying realization began to take shape. The warrant was active, the police were searching, but they were looking in all the wrong places. Because Jacques wasn't hiding in some alleyway in Garland or Rowlett. He was already on the campus grounds, watching, waiting, and calculating how to breach a building that everyone believed was safe. Which leaves us with a haunting piece of the puzzle that still tortures investigators to this day. Jacques was a complete outsider who didn't belong on that campus. So how exactly did he manage to figure out exactly which room Abbaney was hiding in before the police could even figure out he was in the city? When the public first heard the fragments of news breaking from the Texas A&M Commerce campus, the assumption was immediate: a sudden ambush. A flash of violence in a hallway or a tragic breach at the front doors. But when investigators from the Texas Rangers took control of the university's digital surveillance matrix, the timeline they pulled from the hard drives transformed a terrible crime into something infinitely more calculated, something psychological. The security cameras tracked Jacques Smith entering the perimeter of the building at exactly 1 a.m. on Monday, February 3rd. He didn't force a window, and he didn't set off an alarm. He bypassed the electronic keycard system entirely, stepping into the elevator bay with the quiet confidence of someone who belonged there. The elevator doors opened on the second floor, and Jacques walked down the quiet corridor, straight to room 231. He knocked. What followed is a stretch of time that continues to haunt the investigators who mapped it out minute by minute. Jacques didn't open fire the moment the door cracked open. Instead, he stepped inside, and the door clicked shut behind him. For the next 7 hours and 44 minutes, Jacques Dshawn Smith held Deja Matts, Abbaney Matts, and a 2-year-old toddler captive within the claustrophobic confines of that dorm room. Think about the agonizing weight of those hours. Outside, a quiet college campus was sleeping, completely oblivious to the terror unfolding just inches away through a layer of drywall. Inside, the sisters were trapped with a man who had already proven his capacity for unhinged violence just a week prior. There were no midnight phone calls for help, no frantic text messages recovered from their devices, only a suffocating 7-hour standoff dictated entirely by the whim of a captor. Then, as the sun began to rise and the campus began to wake up for Monday morning classes, the clock ran out. At exactly 8:44 a.m., the elevator security camera flickered to life again. Jacques Smith stepped back into the frame. He was entirely alone. He walked calmly out of the building, slid into the driver's seat of a black Hyundai Sonata, and bled back into the Texas traffic, leaving a silent bloodbath behind him. The clock was ticking, but the gap between the murder and the discovery gave Jacques a massive head start. It wasn't until 10:17 a.m. that the door to room 231 was found slightly ajar, exposing the horror inside. But once the machinery of multi-agency law enforcement spun into gear, Jacques' digital trail dissolved rapidly. Within 24 hours of the discovery, a heavily armed tactical unit swarmed a residence in Garland, Texas. They breached the property, catching Jacques completely off guard before he could vanish further into the state. Outside the home, parked prominently in the driveway, sat the black Hyundai Sonata. When forensics teams swept the vehicle, they didn't just find a car. They found a rolling crime scene complete with trace biological evidence linking back to the dorm room. And hidden securely inside the property, detectives recovered the ultimate prize, a semi-automatic 9mm handgun still retaining the chemical scent of recently fired gunpowder. Jacques was in handcuffs.
This morning at approximately 10:17 a.m., University Police Department received a phone call from a student. Officers responded and found 2 deceased adult females in a room. A third person, a small child, approximately 2 years old, who's in stable condition, was also in the room.
The campus killer had been caught, and local prosecutors believed they had a straightforward open and shut case of domestic retaliation. But true crime investigations rarely end neatly at the moment the handcuffs click shut. While Jacques sat in a holding cell, the 9mm handgun and the spent shell casings recovered from room 231 were rushed to a ballistics lab for routine entry into NIBN, the National Integrated Ballistic Information Network. Investigators expected the machine to confirm what they already knew, that this weapon belonged to the horror at Texas A&M Commerce. Instead, the computer screen populated a match that sent a shockwave directly through the department. The microscopic markings on those brass casings didn't just match the dorm room execution. They provided an exact, undeniable signature to a completely separate cold case from just 34 days prior. Suddenly, the timeline exploded backward to December 31, 2019, at 11:30 p.m., New Year's Eve. While the rest of the world was looking forward to a new decade, a 22-year-old father named Stephen Daniels Jr had been lured out of his apartment and shot to death in a gated parking lot in Denton, Texas. For over a month, Denton detectives had been staring at a wall, completely blind to who would want Stephen dead. Now, the ballistics machine was screaming the answer. Jacques Dshawn Smith wasn't just a volatile domestic abuser driven to a singular act of obsession. He was an active, undetected killer who had already taken a father's life just weeks before tracking Abbaney to her sister's campus. And as Texas Rangers cross-referenced the Denton homicide files with Jacques' associates, they realized something even more terrifying. He hadn't pulled the trigger on New Year's Eve alone. He was operating with a violent, coordinated street crew alongside 2 other men, Jalen Hargrove and Ernest Rogers, which rewrites the entire mystery of the Pride Rock breach with a chilling new perspective. If Jacques wasn't working alone in his criminal life, it forces us to look closer at those 7 hours and 44 minutes inside the dorm.
The murder suspect in the Texas A&M University Commerce shooting now facing another capital murder charge for a separate case out of Denton. Police believe 21-year-old Jacques Smith and 2 other men murdered a 22-year-old man on New Year's Eve.
I want to be very clear that Smith was not a target of our investigation. He was not a suspect in our investigation until last night, late last night. We got enough information to then charge him in our case.
This case is just one of multiple crimes Smith is accused of committing this year. Last week, he was arrested for aggravated assault with a deadly weapon in Garland after police say he broke a lamp over Abbaney's head and threw a TV at her. An emergency protective order was issued. Garland police say at the time of their arrest, Smith was not in violation of probation for prior criminal incidents. There were no outstanding warrants. He was transferred to the Dallas County Jail and bonded out January 29th. Then, January January 31st, his probation was revoked. A warrant for his arrest was issued. Just 3 days after that, the Texas A&M Commerce shooting occurred.
The system had assumed a lone stalker had blindly found his way into a locked building. But with a violent crew at his disposal, the puzzle changes entirely. And it leaves us wondering if someone else was helping him navigate the layout of that campus from the shadows. 3 years. For 3 agonizing years, the wheels of justice ground forward at a painful bureaucratic crawl, while a devastated family waited in the wings. For 3 years, the memories of 19-year-old Deja Matts and 20-year-old Abbaney Matts were suspended in legal limbo. But on May 18, 2023, the silence inside the 196th District Court was finally broken, as the state of Texas prepared to bring its full weight down upon Jacques Dshawn Smith. The state was playing for keeps, pursuing a capital murder conviction, a charge that carried the ultimate price, the death penalty. Realizing the sheer gravity of what her client was facing, Jacques' defense attorney, Jessica McDonald, launched an aggressive, final-hour legal maneuver to dismantle the prosecution's case from the inside out. She filed a motion to suppress, a desperate attempt to throw out the highly damaging confessions Jacques had surrendered to investigators following his arrest. The defense argued a two-pronged strategy. First, they claimed that investigators had trampled over Jacques' Fifth Amendment rights during his interrogation. Second, they introduced a highly controversial claim, arguing that Jacques suffered from an intellectual disability, a deficit so severe that he was fundamentally incapable of understanding his Miranda rights or comprehending the gravity of the legal waivers he had signed. Had the judge accepted this argument, the bedrock of the prosecution's evidence would have evaporated. But as the arguments echoed through the courtroom, the prosecution presented a vastly different portrait. A man who had meticulously driven across counties, bypassed sophisticated university security, and held a room captive for nearly 8 hours. This wasn't the work of an incapacitated mind. It was the work of a calculated, disciplined executioner. The judge looked at the evidence, weighed the arguments, and resolutely denied the motion. The confessions stayed. With his back entirely against the wall and the shadow of the death penalty looming over his future, Jacques Smith did the only thing he had left to save his own skin. He broke. He abandoned his plea of innocence, stepped forward, and pleaded guilty to the slaughter of the Matts sisters. The state agreed to waive the death penalty in exchange for the plea, ensuring that the surviving family wouldn't have to endure decades of agonizing capital appeals. The verdict was delivered with absolute finality. Jacques Dshawn Smith was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, ensuring he will draw his very last breath behind steel bars. To solidify his fate, the judge stacked an additional 35 years onto that sentence for his remaining crimes. Yet, even from the isolation of a maximum security cell, Jacques tried one last time to squirm away from accountability. He launched a formal appeal with the Fifth Court of Appeals in Dallas, desperately trying to resurrect the argument that his confession had been unconstitutionally coerced. But the appellate judges saw through the manipulation. In a decisive ruling, the appeals court officially shot down his motion, affirming his lifetime conviction and locking the prison door on Jacques Smith forever. He was gone, left to rot in a cell, stripped of the control he had so violently craved. But as the courtroom cleared and the television cameras packed up their gear, the true legacy of this tragedy refused to be swept away under a pile of closed case files.
A former Vicksburg resident is sentenced in connection with the deaths of 2 women at a Texas A&M University dorm in 2020. Jacques Smith pled guilty last month. He is sentenced to life plus 35 years. According to investigators, Smith killed his ex-girlfriend, Abbaney Matts, and her sister, Deja. Abbaney's 2-year-old son was injured in the attack, but survived.
Because when you strip away the legal terminology and the court dockets, you are left staring at a terrifying, unvarnished truth. This was never just a story about a broken lock or a security breach on a college campus. This was a tragedy of systemic blindness. We live in a world that constantly tells victims of domestic violence to reach out, to report, and to trust the law to protect them. Abbaney Matts did exactly that. She did everything right. When the man she loved turned into a monster and beat her with a frying pan, she called the police. The police arrested him. But 48 hours later, a fractured judicial apparatus looked at a man who had held a knife to a mother's throat and decided his freedom was worth a measly $15,000. The system let him walk, completely blind to the fact that just one county over, that very same man was the prime suspect in an unsolved, cold-blooded New Year's Eve execution. Law enforcement agencies weren't talking to each other. Data wasn't crossing county lines. And because of that administrative silence, a killer was handed his keys and allowed to walk right back out into the world.
Not tell me that there is any justification for a guy that has committed 4 prior violent felonies to be given a $1,500 cash bond release. And this guy got out before that warrant could be activated. When we see something that's broke, the Dallas County justice system has a duty to fix it.
Deja Matts didn't die because of a random twist of fate. She died because she built a sanctuary of higher education for herself and then opened her door to give her fleeing sister a place to hide from the rain. She died because the protective safety nets of the state of Texas failed long before Jacques Smith ever stepped into that elevator at 1 a.m. The next time we look at a domestic violence warning sign and think it's a private family matter, we have to remember room 231. We have to remember that domestic rage is a wildfire that refuses to stay contained. And until the system learns to treat a threat to a woman's life at home with the same urgency as a killer on the loose, the safe spaces we build for our children will always be entirely at risk.